A reading from the book of Ecclesiastes. Vanity of vanities, says Koheleth, vanity of vanities. All things are vanity. Here is one who has labored with wisdom and knowledge and skill, and yet to another who has not labored over it, he must leave property. This also is vanity and a great misfortune. For what profit comes to a man from all the toil and anxiety of heart with which he has labored under the sun? All his days, sorrow and grief is his occupation. Even at night, his mind is not at rest. This also is vanity. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
A reading from the letter of St. Paul to the Colossians. Brothers and sisters, if you were raised with Christ, seek what is above, where Christ is seated at the right hand of God. Think of what is above, not of what is earth. For you have died, and your life is hidden with Christ in God. When Christ, your life, appears, then you too will appear with him in glory. Put to death, then, the parts of you that are earthly: immorality, impurity, passion, evil desire, and the greed that is idolatry. Stop lying to one another, since you have taken off the old self with its practices and have put on the new self, which is being renewed for knowledge in the image of its Creator. Here there is not Greek or Jew, circumcision or uncircumcision, barbarian, Scythian, slave, free, but Christ is all and in all. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God. The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Someone in the crowd said to Jesus, "Teacher, tell my brother to share the inheritance with me." He replied to him, "Friend, who appointed me as your judge and arbitrator?" Then Jesus said to the crowd, "Take care to guard against all greed. For though one may be rich, one's life does not consist of possessions." Then he told them a parable. There was a rich man whose land produced a bountiful harvest. He asked himself, "What shall I do? For I do not have space to store my harvest." And he said, "This is what I shall do. I shall tear down my barns and build larger ones. There I shall store all my grain and other goods, and I shall say to myself, now, as for you, you have so many good things stored up for many years. Rest, eat, drink, and be merry." But God said to him, "You fool, this night your life will be demanded of you, and the things you have prepared, to whom will they belong? Thus will it be for all who store up treasures for themselves, but are not rich in what matters to God." The Gospel of the Lord. Okay, so picture like maybe seventh graders, sixth graders, seventh graders in the summertime, and it's a big old rowboat about as wide as this part of the aisle right here, maybe 15 feet, maybe even longer. Just a big old, not a Garvey, but just an old clamming rowboat, right? Lap strake, wooden thing. It's shallow, like the gunnel was about that high off the water. Must have weighed 300 pounds, 400 pounds, powered by a 3-horsepower Evinrude, okay? It's like a tiny little egg beater of a motor that drives you along when you put the gas in the top. So there were maybe 4 of us in the boat, and the deal was we were allowed to go, it was one of my dad's rowboats, and we were allowed to use it on our end of the bay, but you couldn't go down under the bridge, because when you got under the bridge, the current was really strong, and this thing had no power at all, and God forbid, the next thing you know, if you got stuck in the bridge down there and caught in the current, you could end up like in Staten Island or someplace, or some other place where there's no known form of civilization. Who knows? Just way out there somewhere, right? As we thought on our side of the Great Bay that divided our part from Staten Island. So it took us so long to get to this one restaurant. There was one of these dumpy old sort of, you can picture it, 1960s shack on a pier kind of restaurants, with the big plywood windows that went up like this, and you hooked them at the top and hoped the hooks didn't come out. And on a good day, they'd sell gasoline. And on a really good day, the hot dogs didn't taste like the gasoline. Somehow that always seemed to be the case. I think it was called Kay's Dockside Cabin or something. But our gang really, really liked it there. And so off we went. And it took us the tide must have been coming in because it took us, I just remember, hours to get from like the equivalent of like here to like how far away? Maybe like the very corner of Franklin Park here. It shouldn't have taken that long. It should have taken 15 minutes. It took forever. So we got there, we're out of time. One of the guys had to get home, and we knew that we'd be riding the tide, on a faster trip home. But okay, so we had to eat our hot dogs, drink our Cokes, all for $1. And then Brophy wasn't leaving until he got the coconut cake, which had been on his mind. And his mother had him on a diet, you gotta understand. So this was sworn to secrecy. He was eating the coconut cake, and we weren't leaving without it. So if we had to take it in the boat, we were taking it in the boat. Fine. Well, it was the end of the coconut cake, and Kay of Kay's Dockside Cabin said, Brophy, everybody called him Brophy. He's gone to God now, God rest him. Brophy, too much coconut cake. Brophy, you can have the last 2 slices of cake for the price of 1. He died and went to heaven, right? And she wraps him up on paper plates, little cheesy paper plates with saran wrap over him and a toothpick in the top for what reason, I don't know. He is thrilled to death, but he's got to eat him in the boat. So we're all in the boat. And he's finishing the negotiation about getting the fork or whatever he needs. Comes down. Come on, Brophy, hurry up. We got to go. He gets on the dock. The boat's pointing out at this point. He steps on the gunnel, right? On the edge of the boat. Boat starts to go out. Brophy starts to go down. Kevin Conley says, Brophy, grab the piling. There's a piling right next to him, right? But in order to grab the piling, what does that mean? Cake's going in the soup. No. Plug. And finally the boat, and everybody just breaks into hysterical laughter. Finally the boat gets so far out, Brophy does the most inelegant seat drop with with legs splayed out in this direction, right into the soup, right? Miracle of miracles. One of the cakes is still out of the water. Like, he's going down for the 3rd time, but the cake is still up above the water, right? So, help me get in the boat. No, Brophy, nobody's helping you get in the boat because everybody was laughing. He had to climb out onto the dock. Oh my gosh, it was terrible. But we talked about it for years and years and years. There was a clear indication of Brophy's priorities, right? And we can laugh about it when it's a 7th grader who falls in the bay because he's not going to let go of his cake, won't hold on to the pole that's right here. No, if it's a choice between the cake and the pole and there's any chance of saving this cake, I'm going with the cake. What's it got to do with today's readings? It's this. It's about the priorities we set. And when we see a 7th grader go into the lake, we can laugh about it. When we see ourselves doing it sometimes, when we look back and think, wow, the priorities were a little bit messed up there. Hopefully we have enough candor and enough sense of humor to say, I think I was a little bit off track. I think maybe I didn't really do what Christians are called to do. And that is, when I have my priorities, just run it past God. Just say, Lord, here's the offering. What do you want me to do with it? I think this is what you want me to do. I think I know what you want. I'm trying to want what you want and do what you want. And Lord, let me double check in with you. It makes sense to me. It makes sense to a lot of people. Let me just check in with you. And when we don't check in, that's when we end up with the cake in the water, right? That's when the coconut goes overboard, if you know what I mean. And the guy in the first reading, the coconut was overboard, right? The priorities were all out of whack. What was going on there? Vanity of vanities. You work hard all day. You're going to subdue the land. You're going to have a great harvest. No, wait a second. Why would someone criticize that? Isn't it God who told us, go forth and subdue the land? Wasn't it God who said, when you get to the land of milk and honey, you're going to have bountiful harvests? And if you work hard, everything's going to be fine. So why criticize this guy who's working so hard, laboring in the sun, right? Well, part of it is complicated by the fact that this book comes from about 300 BC, when the Hellenists ruled the eastern end of the Mediterranean. And so the Israelites were really under the heel. And what was going on, there were 2 different levels. the Hellenists were completely avaricious in terms of exploiting the land and the people. And so the Jewish author of Ecclesiastes is in some ways is criticizing the guy who's hell-bent on collecting so much stuff and doing so at the cost of the Israelite labor supply. The people drop dead in the field, too bad, get another one, right? And so this thing about, this excessive desire to accumulate, it's a Jewish criticism of the Hellenist overlords. But it's also a criticism of anybody, no matter what, that we can get too carried away in collecting stuff without asking God, do you want me to do this? And if I collect a lot of stuff, Lord, help me to know what you want me to do with it. Working hard is a beautiful thing, but working hard can be really off track. It can be saving the cake if we haven't run it past God. If we haven't connected the dots in our own hearts and our own heads and our own souls about, wait a minute, how does this priority of mine seem to be something that Jesus would have done? How does this priority of mine line up with God's hopes? How does it renew the face of the earth? How does it help me to be a priest, a prophet, and a king? How does it benefit other people? Right? And we don't want to just go with dopey old stereotypes, you have to be a priest or a nun. Absolutely not. Any priority that's offered up to God and is run past God, it's a beautiful thing. As long as we run it past God and connect the dots. And so it is in the gospel today too. We get the same thing. The gospel of prosperity, which underlies Puritan theology and a lot of other mainline Protestant theologies, says that, listen, you work hard, God's going to reward you. So what's the matter with the guy working his tail off, getting a great big harvest and putting it in the barn? The Lord says in all sorts of places you're supposed to do that. And wasn't that exactly what Joseph did when he went down into Egypt and he helped the Pharaoh collect all the surplus grain and put it in the barn so they could feed people for a long time, right? What's the matter with that? Wait, Lord, I don't get it. Why are you complaining that I'm getting too much grain in my barn? Well, did you run it past God? Did you check in with God? Did you say, Lord, is this something you want me to do? And Lord, if I do this thing, where do you want me to go with it? And what should I do about my bountiful harvest? Is it something you want me to share with the people? Is it something you want me to feed the cows? What do you want me to do with this bountiful harvest, Lord? But what we get here is the story of someone who was so single-minded, and it's all about me. I'm going to do this. I'm going to be rich. I'm going to be happy ever after. I'm going to eat, drink, and be merry. All of those things. And never check in with, I wonder what God wants me to do here. And he might have gotten to the same answer, but he didn't check in. And so we get the save the cake thing, right? Let me just go with whatever my priority is right now, unreflected, undiscerned. And you know the difference. You've made enough really wise, generous, inspired choices in your life. You've established priorities that completely line up with God's hopes. You know you've done it over and over and over again in the way you live your life, in the way you engage your family, in the way you raise your family, in the way you provide for your family, in the way that you teach the kids in your class, in the way that you heal the people who come into your clinic, in the way that you help the people when they come to you because you're a lawyer. All those ways, 1,001 ways, in which it's pretty much second nature because you're great Christians, right? You're continually setting priorities that do line up with God's hopes. Of course, we'd all be better off if we stopped and asked, Lord, help me to connect the dots. Help me to see the way in which this connects with Christ's mission. Let me see the ways in which Jesus was doing the first century version of what I'm doing right here. You do it all the time. But today the challenge is, even though it's the green season, is to ask a purple question. And that question is, when do you think you've set a priority and then looking back can think, it was a bad idea and I didn't run it past Jesus, right? We've all done it. I mean, my list is probably longer than yours. But we've done that too. Not nearly to the extent that you've made wonderful, inspired, holy choices. But come on, looking back, and we learn from our mistakes, and the people in the readings made mistakes today, so let's have the sense of humor and the candor we need to join them in learning from those mistakes. What was a time when you went off charging in a certain direction? It might have been the sport that you played. It might have been the committee that you joined. It might have been the ministry with which you were associated. It could have been the professional job change that you made. It could have been the house switch that you were up to. It could have been in a commitment you made to help someone else. And the Lord was saying, that wasn't my idea, man. It could be in the way that you've managed tensions in relationship. It could be in the way that you've managed disappointing financial news. It could be in the way that you distanced yourself or entered too aggressively into a situation. Listen, it's part of the human condition. Each one of us is going to save the cake. Each one of us is going to save the cake, and we're going to do it more than once. That is, we're going to set priorities that don't really line up with God's hopes, and we learn from them, and we keep relying on God's grace to help us set the right priorities. So to get the list balanced, I'd ask you just to name 3 or 4 places where you have these priorities about the way you spend your time. You want to know what someone's priorities are? Look at their date book. It's easy, right? I'd ask you to notice 3 or 4 priorities that consume your time. And you can say, you know what, Lord? Thank you. I think they do line up with your hopes. Even if I didn't ask you, I know deep down that they do. The priorities you have in terms of family, profession, athletics, academics, you name it. And then name just one time when you set a priority, pursued it with energy, and you realize looking back, man, I was saving the cake. That was a bad idea. How did I fall for it? What was I thinking? When have you really gotten it right? And when have you saved the cake? And what do you learn from it? About the great things God does through you and with you and in you when we take the time to run it past Jesus. So, it's about priorities. It's about those things that we put at the top of our list and say, this is going to control my schedule. This is the thing where I'm going to spend more of my time or my psychic energy or whatever else it is. And most of the time, we get it exactly right? And we just know, we have that gut sense that when I set this priority about work, about whether we're going to move, about the friends I'm going to have, about how I'm going to get involved in church, about you name it. You're good Christians, and you almost always get it right. So the question is, following the lead of today's readings, can we learn from our mistakes, right? No, the answer isn't build a bigger barn. The answer is check in with Jesus. No, the answer isn't work harder in the noonday sun or make the Israelites work harder in the noonday sun, unless it's weeding the labyrinth. The answer is check in with God. What does God want you to do? So name a place where a bunch of places, I'd say 3 or 4, where you know in your heart of hearts, this is your priority. These are your priorities, and you're doing a bang-up job, and it lines up with God's hopes. And then look in the Wayback Machine or the Recent Back Machine, and just notice, man, I gave myself to that completely, and that was a fool's errand. That was saving the cake, man. That was totally saving the cake, and that was stupid. And I never checked in with Jesus. Where you're really getting it right, your priorities are terrific. One place where you made a mistake and you can learn from it. About asking the right question. Lord, is this what you want? Let us pray.